Are you sure we're not making a mistake? Fools don't question, Varek. The deep voice echoed inside Varek's helmet, cold and unwavering. You were chosen for this mission because you were not afraid to do what was necessary. And now, you hesitate? Varek's fingers trembled over the controls of his craft, staring out at the blue planet below, its swirling clouds barely visible through the dense fog of the ship's viewport. His heartbeat thudded in his ears, louder than any predator's growl. But this wasn't like any hunt. This was something else entirely. I don't know what we're hunting, Tal, Varek muttered, gripping the controls tighter. These humans, they're unlike anything we've faced. They're not prey. They resist. Then we will teach them, Tal replied, his voice almost soothing, but still edged with the sharpness of a predator. We are the hunters. We are the apex. There is nothing they can do that will stop us. But Varek had seen it. The signs were there, from the first glance at the scattered reports, the strange footage from past encounters. Humans were not just prey. They were something more. Something that didn't simply bow down to the inevitable fate of being hunted. We're not supposed to be here, are we? Varek asked softly, his voice a rare crack of uncertainty. Tall silence filled the cabin, and Varek knew his mentor was considering the question with the same intensity he had always put into his own thoughts. The mission had been clear: arrive, hunt, claim dominance, and leave. They had conquered dozens of worlds, countless species that trembled beneath their might. But this time, something had changed. The planet they had arrived at was called Earth by the humans. To the alien species known as the Yrkavar, it was simply the next in a long line of potential hunting grounds. The humans were a curious species, evolving rapidly, unpredictable, and highly resilient. But that's what made them dangerous, Varek thought. They didn't cower. They didn't yield. And that was the moment Varek realized something terrifying. The humans weren't afraid. Worse, they didn't seem to understand the concept of fear the way the Yrkavar did. They had fought back, some of them daring to try and engage their hunters, others retreating to underground bunkers to continue their defiance. But what troubled Varek the most was the sudden change in the predators. The ones who had come before them had never hesitated, never questioned their orders. The Yrkavar were born to hunt. It was their very nature. But something was different now. Tal, his mentor, had spoken of conquest and victory. Yet, the Yrkavar were no longer hunting for sport. Something had shifted within their ranks. And it all started with one encounter. The first human to approach Varek was not in fear, nor with weapons in hand. She came alone, her eyes wide and filled with a curiosity that unsettled him. You, she had said in a language he barely understood, though his translator device captured the meaning. Why aren't you fighting? Varek had asked, instinctively reaching for his weapons, though something in his mind urged him to hesitate. I don't want to fight, the woman had answered, looking at him not as a hunter would, but as a peer. Why are you hunting us? Varek had been taken aback. He had heard humans speak of peace, of defiance, of the will to survive, but he had never heard one question the nature of his presence in such a way. Tal's voice came through his earpiece, cold as ice. Kill her. But Varek did not move. He couldn't. The woman's gaze pierced through the helmet, something in her eyes that made him wonder. Was it truly his nature to destroy everything in front of him, or was there another way? Varek had always been taught that his species was the supreme hunter. The Yrkavar thrived on the thrill of the chase, the adrenaline rush of the hunt. But what if there was no chase? What if the humans, despite their weaknesses, were not to be hunted but understood? Varek pondered this as he stood in the midst of the alien command center, his helmet now off, the air filled with the thick tension of his people. Tal stood beside him, his expression unreadable. You've lost focus, Tal growled, his voice like the rumble of thunder. This is why we do what we do. You are weakening. You no longer understand our purpose. Varek looked at Tal, his eyes filled with uncertainty. What if the humans aren't just prey? What if they are something more? More? More than what? They are weak, Varek. That is why we take them, break them. That is the law of the Yrkavar. Tal's grip on his weapon tightened. But what if there's a different way? Varek asked, his voice quieter now. What if we could learn from them? The room fell silent. The other YRKVAR warriors, standing in the shadows, waited for Tal's response. A low growl vibrated in Tal's throat, the only warning before he spoke. Then you are no longer one of us, Tal hissed. You are a traitor. Days passed, and Varek found himself torn between his species' instinct to hunt and something far more insidious. The fear that his actions were not driven by survival, but by a twisted legacy of conquest. The humans were not weak. They were not prey. They were resilient, driven, and in many ways, far more complex than Varek had ever considered. And so, he began to question everything. Tal's voice rang in his mind. You dare defy the order of the hunt? You will bring dishonor to our species. Varek knew there was no going back now. His connection with the humans had shifted something in him. He had to make a choice. Would he return to his kind and fulfill the mission as he had been trained? Or would he choose the path of an outcast, one who would defy his very nature? The world around him seemed to whisper secrets, strange things he hadn't noticed before. The quiet strength of the humans, their refusal to bow to superior power, their relentless drive to survive. He began to understand that what had once seemed like weakness was, in fact, the greatest strength of all. Varek looked out across the earth one last time, the decision weighing heavy on his heart. Would he stand with his own kind and slaughter them all, as the YRKVAR had done with countless other species? Or would he protect them and fight for a future where all species might live, not as prey and predator, but as equals? The silence stretched between them, and the choice had to be made. Varek's mind buzzed with conflicting thoughts. The silence in the ship was deafening. Tal's words still echoed in his ears, but now they felt distant, like the growls of a beast who had lost its prey. He was no longer sure whether the path of destruction was the right one. The humans, with their strange capacity for resilience, had somehow shattered his worldview. Varek had witnessed countless battles in his life. He had seen entire civilizations collapse under the weight of his species' might. But the humans, they fought differently. It wasn't just with weapons or strength, but with an unyielding will to survive, to adapt, to rise up when the odds seemed insurmountable. The woman, the first human he had encountered, was still fresh in his mind. Her eyes had not been filled with fear or rage. There had been something more, something vulnerable but defiant. She had looked at him as though she understood him, not as a creature to be feared or destroyed, but as something that could be reasoned with. What do you think you'll do now? Tal's voice crackled through the comlink, breaking Varek's thoughts. I don't know, Varek replied, his tone heavy with doubt. I think we're making a mistake. Tal's growl came through, louder now. What mistake? You've been trained to hunt, to kill. You are YRKVAR. Your duty is to your people. You are no longer one of them. The word stung like acid in Varek's chest, but there was no turning back. He could no longer ignore the fact that there was something deeply wrong with the mission, something he couldn't justify. He had seen too much of the human spirit to dismiss them as mere prey. No, they were not like the others they had encountered before. Later that night, Varek found himself standing alone on the edge of a cliff, gazing at the distant lights of a human city. Below him, the sounds of the world carried upward, cars, people talking, the hum of technology blending with nature. It was a strange, dissonant melody that seemed to represent everything about these creatures. Chaotic, yet oddly harmonious. Why do you hesitate? Came the voice of Cora, another YRKVAR warrior who had once been his friend. She stepped from the shadows, her form elegant and lethal. Her eyes glinted in the moonlight. Are you afraid of what you see here, Varek? These humans have no place in our universe. They are not worthy of our respect. Varek turned to her slowly. I don't think we're the ones who should be respected. Cora's lip curled into a snarl. What are you saying? You've gone soft, Varek. We are hunters. We don't question our purpose. The humans are weak, and they should know their place. Varek's gaze lingered on the city below. What if they're not weak? What if their strength is in their unity, in their refusal to bow down? You're making excuses, Cora hissed, stepping closer to him, her voice low with disdain. You've seen what they do to our kind. They fight back. They don't surrender. That's why we must break them. I'm not sure they need to be broken, Varek said quietly. Maybe they need to be understood. Cora's claws extended, a warning sign. This is treason, Varek. You're risking everything. You're no longer part of the YRKvar if you continue down this path. The words hung heavy in the air between them, but Varek didn't flinch. He had made his decision. No matter the cost, he couldn't allow himself to be complicit in the destruction of a species that, in its own way, was thriving, fighting, evolving, surviving. I won't hunt them, Varek said, his voice steady. For a long moment, Cora said nothing. Then, with a final, bitter glance, she turned and disappeared into the shadows, leaving Varek alone once more. The following days were tense. Varek had begun to work covertly, avoiding the YRKvar commanders and planning his next move. He needed to know more about the humans. He needed to understand them fully before making any further decisions. The encounters he had witnessed so far had only scratched the surface. His first action was to visit the human stronghold. A small group of survivors had managed to hold out against the YRKvar forces, retreating into a hidden underground base. Varek knew that the humans there would be wary of him, rightly so. But he hoped that by showing them he was not a threat, they might offer him the answers he sought. As he approached the base, he was met by the same woman who had first challenged him. Her name was Alyssa. She was not alone this time. A group of survivors stood behind her, each armed, their faces hardened by the brutal war they had fought for so long. "You," Alyssa said, her voice cautious but not fearful. "What do you want?" Varek's heart beat faster, the weight of the moment pressing on him. He could feel the tension in the air, the raw power that each human possessed despite their apparent vulnerability. "I need to know why you fight," Varek said, lowering his weapon in a gesture of goodwill. "I need to understand why you're not afraid of us." Alyssa's eyes studied him, the silence between them thick. Then, slowly, she stepped forward. "You think we're not afraid?" she asked. "You think we're not terrified every single day? But that's the thing. You can't let fear control you. It's in our blood to fight, to survive. We may not be the strongest, but we have something you don't understand. We have the will to keep going, no matter how many times we're knocked down." Varek's mind reeled. Her words resonated deeply within him, shaking the very core of what he had believed. The YRKvar thrived on the thrill of the hunt, the joy of breaking their prey. But these humans, these seemingly fragile beings, did not break. They fought back with a tenacity that was unlike anything he had ever encountered. "Why don't you just surrender?" Varek asked, his voice filled with genuine curiosity. Alyssa laughed softly, shaking her head. "Surrender? To you? Why should we? We're not your prey. We're not something to be conquered. We're human. We survive. We fight for what's ours." The intensity of her words struck Varek like a physical blow. He had spent his entire life hunting species that had given up, that had crumbled in the face of his kind's power. But the humans, they weren't like that. They didn't break. And that, he realized, was their greatest strength. "I don't want to hurt you," Varek whispered, his voice full of conflict. "I just don't understand." Alyssa regarded him for a long moment, her gaze unreadable. Then, she stepped closer, her face softened by a glimmer of something like hope. Maybe you don't need to understand. But if you want to help us, stop the hunt. Help us find another way." The weight of her words hung in the air between them, and for the first time, Varek felt something stirring deep within him, something he had never felt before. A sense of purpose. Over the next few days, Varek continued his silent observation of the humans, learning their ways, their culture, and their resilience. Every encounter reinforced what Alyssa had said. These people were not meant to be broken. They were survivors. But despite his growing understanding, the tension between Varek and the YRKvar was mounting. His hesitation to carry out his duties had not gone unnoticed. Cora, ever watchful, had begun to suspect that Varek was turning against their kind. The YRKvar were not a species to tolerate defection. Tal's voice buzzed in Varek's earpiece once more. "You've made your choice, Varek. You are no longer part of the YRKvar. You've betrayed us. Varek's heart skipped a beat, but there was no fear in his chest, only a profound sense of resolve. I haven't betrayed anyone. I've just realized that I can't continue down this path. There was a long, dangerous silence. Then, Tal's voice crackled, icy and sharp. Then you leave me no choice, Varek. The hunt is on, and you are the prey. The night was alive with tension. The lights of the underground human base flickered as if reacting to the intensity of Varek's decision. His once solid resolve was now split in two, torn between his instinct to defend his species and his newfound bond with the humans. There was no turning back now. Tal's warning still echoed in his mind like a drumbeat. You are the prey. Varek stood at the edge of the human stronghold, contemplating everything he had learned about their resilience, their spirit. The humans weren't like the others the Kavar had conquered. They didn't bend to the force of superior power. They adapted, fought back, and survived. The Kavar never encountered something like that, and neither had Varek. As the distant sounds of the human base grew louder behind him, Alyssa's words from earlier reverberated through his thoughts. We fight for what's ours. He had made his decision. The hunt had gone on long enough. Tal's warning was more than a threat. It was a declaration of war. The Kavar had already begun their descent onto the planet. Their ships loomed in the sky, ominous and vast, a symbol of the relentless force they were about to unleash. But Varek was no longer part of that machine of destruction. He had walked away from his own kind, and there was no going back. He had decided to stand with the humans. I'll help you, Varek told Alyssa, his voice resolute. I don't know how yet, but I will. She regarded him with a mixture of wariness and cautious hope. She had seen many things during the conflict, and trust was a currency that had grown scarce. But Varek's sincerity was clear in his eyes. We're going to need more than just words, Varek, Alyssa replied. The Kavar don't negotiate. We fight. I know, Varek said quietly, his gaze focused on the looming enemy ships above. But maybe, just maybe, we don't have to fight alone. Over the following days, Varek became an unlikely ally to the human resistance. He shared his knowledge of the Kavar technology, their tactics, and their weaknesses. With his help, the humans developed new weapons capable of countering the overwhelming force that the Kavar had relied on. Varek's presence bolstered their confidence, and the base began to hum with a renewed energy. But Tal had not forgotten Varek's betrayal. The Kavar were a prideful species, and such defection could not go unpunished. Word spread quickly within their ranks that Varek was aiding the humans, and the consequences would be swift. Tal himself had come to Earth, his massive form descending from the skies in a ship of unparalleled power. He was furious, and his arrival was heralded by a destructive storm of energy blasts that ravaged the outskirts of the human city. The battle had begun. Varek stood beside Alyssa, watching the carnage unfold. His heart raced in his chest, but he no longer felt fear, only determination. This wasn't about being hunted anymore. It was about fighting for something that was worth protecting. We can't win like this, Varek said. Not against Tal. But I know a way to stop him. Alyssa raised an eyebrow. What do you mean? Varek's gaze shifted back to the massive alien craft hovering overhead. The Kavar have a central command ship. If we can disable it, the entire fleet will fall apart. We need to target its core. But we'll never get close to it, Alyssa said. It's surrounded by their best warriors. That's why we need a distraction, Varek said, his eyes narrowing. And I know just the way to give it to them. The night of the final battle arrived. The human resistance, armed with Varek's intel, launched a full-scale assault on the Kavar fleet. It was a battle unlike any the humans had faced before, brutal, chaotic, and fast-paced. The Kavar fought with an unrelenting fury, their warriors clashing with the human forces on the ground and in the sky. Varek had one mission: to infiltrate the Kavar command ship and destroy its core. It was a suicide mission, but he knew it had to be done. With the human forces providing cover, Varek made his way to the heart of the battlefield. The alien craft hovered just above, its massive energy shield repelling human attacks. But Varek had a plan. He used the confusion of the battle to slip past the YRKVAR lines, stealthily infiltrating their command ship. Inside, he accessed the central control room. Tal's voice was already booming through the ship's speakers, issuing orders to crush the resistance. "I didn't want it to come to this, Varek," Tal's voice echoed. "But you forced my hand. You betrayed your own people." Varek stood in front of the control panel, his hands shaking. This was it. The final moment. "I didn't betray anyone," Varek muttered to himself. "I chose something else." He activated the self-destruct sequence on the ship's core. As the countdown began, the hum of the massive YRKVAR ship seemed to vibrate through the air. Varek ran, knowing he had mere minutes to escape before the ship would explode, taking the entire fleet with it. Outside, the sky was illuminated by the explosion of the command ship. A massive shockwave rippled through the battlefield, sending both YRKVAR and human forces reeling. The YRKVAR fleet began to disintegrate as their central command was destroyed. Varek emerged from the smoke, his breath heavy and ragged. His body was battered, but the battle was won. The YRKVAR forces were in disarray, their leadership shattered. The humans had fought back, and they had won. Alyssa stood at the edge of the battlefield, her expression a mix of disbelief and triumph. "You did it," she said, her voice softer than before. "You saved us." Varek nodded, his heart still racing, but the weight on his shoulders had lifted. He had made the choice. He had stood against his own kind and chosen something greater, the survival of a species that was determined to never give up. He had chosen humanity. Days passed, and the world slowly began to heal. The remnants of the YRKVAR forces were driven off, and Earth's people began rebuilding, their unity stronger than ever. Varek had found his place among them, no longer a predator but an ally, someone who had once hunted but now fought for a future of peace. Alyssa approached him one evening, her face unreadable but her eyes filled with gratitude. "Where do you go from here?" she asked. Varek looked out over the horizon, where the stars twinkled brightly above, a reminder of the vastness of the universe. "I don't know," he said quietly, "but for the first time, I feel like I have a purpose. A real one." Alyssa smiled. "Then let's make sure we fight for it together." Varek nodded, knowing that the road ahead would not be easy. There would always be more battles to fight, more challenges to face. But for the first time, he knew he wasn't fighting alone. And maybe, just maybe, the galaxy could change. One person at a time. One choice at a time.